Thank you for joining us today during this Zoom interview at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force with Vicki Crawford, and now your last name is Wingett. Is that pronounced
Yes,
correctly?
Wingett.
Wingett. Okay,
We
great.
have to wing it.
What inspired you to join the Air Force?
I'm a brat. My father was a career non-commissioned officer, started in the Marines. He was a flying sergeant in the Marines for a short time during the Korean War. And then when he got back from Korea, he transferred into the Air Force. So I've known that all my life. And I went on a full ride scholarship to the University of San Francisco, and about halfway through, they pulled my room and board scholarship, so that $100 stipend from Air Force ROTC looked very enticing. That was one of my motivators. The other was I used to watch air shows from the tower cab since my dad was an air traffic controller, and just always wanted to fly, although I didn't realistically think that military flying would open up to women in my lifetime, but you never know. But I think one of the things that really motivated me to finally make the step, when I was in high school, we were doing a debate in our political science class about the Vietnam War, which was going on at the time, and the draft and this sort of thing. And I was very conservative and was supporting the government's position and all this. And one of my male friends turned to me and he said, "Well, that's all well and good, but you don't face the draft." And I thought, that's just not right. He's right. I don't have a say in the matter if I don't have to face the consequences of it. So I always had in the back of my mind from that point forward that I should at least do some time in the military. And then, like I said, when I ran out of money, I got the kick in the pants to actually go and do it. So I did the 2-year Air Force ROTC program, which was over at San Francisco State University. My school, USAF, had the Army ROTC program, and Berkeley had the Navy ROTC program. So kind of drive from one school to the other, depending on which program you're in. So that's how I ended up in the Air Force.
What did your family think about your choice to pursue the Air Force, but particularly the aviation career field?
No one in my family ever had a discouraging word. They were all quite excited about the idea, even my mother. She was a good military wife, and so she was, used to her husband being in dangerous situations and whatnot. So at least she never expressed to me that it even crossed her mind that she was concerned about it. She was very proud of it, but not concerned.
What does it mean to you to be part of the first undergraduate pilot training class to include women?
That wasn't really one of my considerations when I joined, although I did know that it's probably best to be in the first class rather than a later class. At the time that they opened pilot training to women, I was a missile maintenance officer, combat targeting team chief up in Grand Forks, North Dakota in the middle of winter. Sometimes it gets down to minus 60 degrees there with the wind chill factor. I think it gets colder in Grand Forks and in a lot of places up in Alaska. So I read in the base newspaper that they were opening pilot training to women in Phoenix, Arizona, and it made the decision very easy to go. I was more concerned about the opportunity to fly. As I said, I had always wanted to do it. I wasn't sure I was going to have a chance to do it, so I was very excited to be able to do it. But as I was going along, I had always kept my doors open. When I was in college, the Army had approached me with an offer of full room and board and books. My tuition was already paid for with the other scholarship. But I thought to myself, if they ever do open pilot training to women, it'd be in the Air Force. I mean, the Air Force has the airplanes. Of course, somehow the Navy beat them to it. I haven't figured that one out yet. So I was ready to jump on the opportunity when it showed up.
Did you take your first flight when you were in ROTC?
No, when I got notice of acceptance, I went over to the University of North Dakota, which has a vibrant aviation program, and went up with an instructor pilot a few times, just satisfy myself that I wasn't going to embarrass myself by getting airsick or something.
Had you considered staying in the missile career field, because around the same time they opened up the launch control facilities to women?
They opened it up sometime after I had left. And frankly, at the time, I thought I was in a dead-end career because the launch control facility was not open. And General Doherty had made it quite clear that as long as he was in charge, it was not going to open. So that meant that the missile career field, as long as it stayed in SAC anyway, Strategic Air Command, I was in a dead-end career because in the Air Force, and at that time in SAC, you were either a pilot or a missileer if you wanted to advance in rank. So both avenues were closed to me at first, and so when pilot training opened up, besides, it's a lot more fun to fly an airplane than sit in a hole.
That's for sure. How do you feel about having your story featured at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force?
I'm very honored. But I do have to ask, why did it take so long?
I'd like to know that answer too.
I look back on it, and almost to the day, it was 45 years before the military acknowledged the WASPs. And that was a terrible crime, in my opinion. And now it's taken 45 years for us. So I'm hoping that in the future, when there are female accomplishments, that it'll get recognized a little bit earlier than 45 years.
I agree. When museum visitors see your exhibit, what do you hope they will learn from your experience?
What I'm hoping for is they will look at what we've done and wonder how we did it. And they will realize that it takes determination, it takes education, it takes training, it takes staying aware of your environment. I like to say that luck equals preparation plus opportunity. And you can have all the opportunities in the world, but if you're not prepared to take advantage of them, you miss out. You can do a lot of preparation, but if you don't pay attention, you may not have the opportunity to throw that line out with the big hook and reel it back in and be able to take the opportunity. So that's what I'm hoping, that especially the young people will realize that nothing comes easy, but you can do almost anything you want if you keep at it.
Before undergraduate pilot training opened to women, had you thought about becoming a pilot?
Oh, I thought about it since I was a kid. I just didn't, as I said, I didn't expect the opportunity to come along, but on the other hand, I was preparing myself if it did. I don't like to break barriers, as they say. I like to find ways to go around, up, under, to get to where I want. So, I didn't go out and protest or raise a sign or call up people and yell and scream at them because women weren't flying. But I did make sure that I was ready if it ever opened up.
You are an inspiration to many women who joined the Air Force and became pilots. What women inspired you to break barriers or go around your obstacles and to be part of the first class of undergraduate pilot training to include women?
Well, the woman that inspired me the most was my mother. She raised 7 good citizens. She followed my father all over the country and even over to Morocco. We rarely stayed in any place more than four years. I remember I went through 12 schools between 1st and 12th grade. So she was my best inspiration. As far as the idea of aviation or the military and whatnot, I was a big Star Trek fan, the original Star Trek. I wanted to be Captain Kirk, on the female version, of course. And the woman who inspired me during that period was Diana Rigg, the British actress. She played Mrs. Emma Peel in the British Avengers. And she was always able to hold her own. Yeah, she was fighting the bad guys. So I wanted to be her. I remember I used to have her hairstyle and everything at one time.
Sadly, Susan Rogers passed away in 1992. How would you describe her?
She was a lot of fun. She had a wicked sense of humor. She was very generous of her time and giving. We had a young man in our pilot screening class who was having problems with cuff anxiety. You put a blood pressure cuff on him and his blood pressure would just skyrocket. So she spent a lot of time just meeting with him and slapping a blood pressure cuff on him and making him get used to it. As she contacted some doctors over at I think it's Brooks Army Medical Center. They're in San Antonio to got him in for an evaluation from them to help him so that he could graduate with the rest of us.
That's very kind.
Yes, she was.
How long did you serve in the Air Force, and what rank were you when you separated?
I did 8 years of active duty, separated as a captain, and then 7 or 8 years in the reserves and separated as a major.
Why did you choose to separate from the Air Force?
I went to the T-43 squadron at Mayfair Air Force Base. We used to jokingly call it Detachment 101 Southwest Airlines Training School. And almost everyone in my squadron was getting out, when their commitment was over and going to fly for Southwest, even my squadron commander. In fact, my squadron commander was my sponsor and arranged for my interview and whatnot with Southwest. So that was a part of it. And of course, the airline paid better than the Air Force at the time. But the catalyst that actually moved me was my military personnel center counselor, I believe they were called. I didn't realize at the time, apparently he was under a lot of pressure from above to keep the first class in the Air Force. And I was leaving, and that one day we had a phone conversation and he kind of lost it and was got very angry. And I told him it wasn't that I wanted to get out. I just wanted to delay my reassignment to a C5 over at Travis because I was in the middle of law school and I had exams coming up. I had my mother and 2 sisters and 2 horses and dogs, cats, and gerbils that I would have to move. And I was the head of the T-43 ground school at the time, and I was in the process of converting from the old slide system to newer technology for T-43 ground school. So I told him, I need about 6 months to get all this stuff together. Well, that would have put me in the area where I could put in my papers and leave without moving. So I think he thought I was just stalling for time. And he became very angry and said, "Look, bitch, if you don't like it, I'll send you to Turkey." I didn't want to go to Turkey, but I said, "Thank you very much." Hung up the phone, called my former squadron commander in in Dallas, and said, "Bob, can you get me an interview?" So that was the catalyst. And I'm not sure if I would have left it. Didn't want to fly the C5 because at the time it didn't fly much. It was broken all the time. But I would have taken the 141. But I think fate was moving me into a different direction. And I was very, very happy at Southwest.
Good. What were some of your most memorable assignments or missions? Are there any significant events from your career you would like to share?
Before pilot training, as I said, I was a missile maintenance officer. Gave me an opportunity to work with the young enlisted guys, manage personnel, which pilots don't normally do until they get further up in rank in the military. So that experience stood me in good stead for the rest of my life. I even ended up owning a aircraft charter company for a short time. And a good part of the experience I had in the Air Force was used in that. And I had a great couple of non-commissioned officers to guide the young lieutenant in taking care of the troops. I remember one of the first things that my master sergeant said to me was, "Lieutenant, get a $50 bill, put it in the back of your wallet someplace where you won't accidentally spend it. And then if you're out in the field and you guys have to spend the night, you'll have some money to pay for your partner and your guard, because we were always carrying top secret information, so we had an armed guard with us. You'll be able to pay for their meals when you get to the launch control facility that you'll spend the night at." And the idea of always taking care of my troops was burned into my soul by the master sergeant. And that stayed with me throughout my career at the Air Force and the airline.
Why do you think it took so long for the Air Force to start training female pilots, since the WASP had proven women's ability during World War II?
I think it's probably for the same reason that the WASPs were disbanded even before the end of the war. And no one hired them as pilots either. Is because we were competing with the men. And it was, especially back then, a man's world. And so it took them a long time to accept us. I think the integration of the services, black and white, sort of paved the way for us, for the women. You know, you had General Chappie James showing that a black man could do the job as well as a white man. And eventually the reasoning had to come around, I guess, that a woman could probably do a job as well as a man. And so that helped open up the opportunities for us finally. And then it was the bicentennial, and everybody wanted to do something special for the bicentennial. A neighbor of mine had a daughter who, a neighbor of mine in, I should say, a neighbor of my mother's had a daughter who was in the first Air Force Academy class, which also was in 76. So I think it was just the timing was right. There was a good occasion to do it, and it made absolutely no sense to put the ban on. I mean, countries in Europe have had female sovereigns for centuries. So I think the last of the objections finally fell away.
Did you think pilot training was more difficult because of your gender?
I think the instructors and the management went out of their way to try and level the playing field so that it would be a true evaluation of the test program. They couldn't show too much favoritism to either side without skewing the results.
Did you feel any of the instructors were harder on female pilot training students?
No, I don't think so, at least not from my experience. I had an interesting time with my T-37 instructor. I was getting behind. I couldn't figure out why. Everybody else seemed to be, you know, talking. Everyone else seemed to be catching on to this a lot faster than I was. And so on my next flight, after talking to some of the others, I decided to observe a little more carefully what we were doing. And I noticed when my instructor would take the airplane to demonstrate something, it took a long time for me to get it back. And then when we got down from that flight, his wife met him. Down the hall, there was a door, and his wife drove up. And then she moved over to the passenger seat, and he got into the driver's seat instead of them just driving away. And at that point, I had this light bulb moment. I said, well, that's what's going on, is he doesn't realize, and I didn't realize until then, that he was taking a lot more stick time. So I had a discussion with him, a very polite, civil discussion, and we both agreed that we would make sure that he didn't hang on to the airplane any longer than he needed to. And then I rapidly got back up with the rest of my class members. But it was funny how the cultural norms of the day had affected, you know, the training program. It was probably something that should have been documented as part of the test parameters. And then with my T-38 instructor, he was probably treat me the way the guys are. You're not, you need to get down and do this, work harder, and you need to fly the airplane, don't let it fly you. And we were out doing a survey of a low-level route that they were planning to do because he had been a pilot that did a lot of low-level flying when he was in his non-training assignment. And so I just put it down in the weeds and kept going until he finally said, "All right, Vicky, you've proved your point." And after that, we got along great.
Did you feel any of the standards or requirements were modified to help women pass undergraduate pilot training?
I hope not. I don't know the word. I doubt it. It's my understanding they were sending our grade sheets to Randolph every day, which would make it difficult to adjust the grades, shall we say.
Why were the female students required to attend pilot screening prior to starting the class with their male peers?
To me, it made a lot of sense. All the male pilots in our class were Academy graduates. So they had all had the opportunity to fly at the Academy. And many of them had gotten their private pilot's license. And I think Sue Rogers may have been the only gal in our class who had a private pilot's license. And some of us had, virtually no stick time at all. So we needed to catch up. The Air Force does things different than civilian flying. So even Sue had a lot to catch up on as far as how to run a checklist, how to do emergency procedures, how to stand up in class and recite on a no-notice basis an emergency procedure from memory, or to state the aircraft limitations from memory, and that sort of thing. So we needed the pilot screening program. We needed the flying time. We needed to get up to so low and have our confidence as high as the male pilots had in order to compete with them. And also, it was a screening program. And I'm sure the Air Force Academy, in effect, screened some of the people. Some people are prone to air sickness and they can't help it. We had our young man with the high blood pressure problem. So, the screening was a necessary step and was not an uncommon step. I'm sure the Academy had medically and otherwise screened the young men who were going to join us at Williams Air Force Base for the class.
Do you think the acceptance of female aviators during the 1970s was symbolic of changes in America?
Well, we touched on that a little bit in the prior question. Yeah, I think they were looking for an opportunity to do something symbolic for the bicentennial, to respond to the rising feminism movement. And just to kind of catch up with the times.
What aircraft did you fly during your career?
I flew the T-43, which was a Boeing 737-200. Great airplane. I really liked flying the big airplane. I wasn't all that anxious to fly something like a T-38 all my life. I like being able to move around. enjoyed taking the airplane to air shows and pitching out and doing a short final and showing people that a big airplane can fly similar to the fighters. It was a lot of fun flying it, and I was an instructor pilot in it before I left. So it was a lot of fun to teach people how to fly.
And what did you fly in commercial airlines?
I flew a Boeing 737, 200, 300, 700. As I said, Detachment 101, Southwest Airlines Training School.
If women hadn't been limited on what aircraft they could fly, what do you think you would have chosen?
I thought I wanted to fly a transport or combat version of the C-130. To me, all the fun is in the landings and the low level work, and I thought it'd be great to run along a dirt landing area, a couple of feet above the ground, kicking stuff out the back door. To me, I thought that would be exciting.
Was your status as one of the first Air Force female pilots well known throughout your career? And do you think it impacted your career or experience with the Air Force?
Well, I was only in for the, I believe it was a 6-year commitment we had at the time. And so everyone in my squadron knew who I was. I did do a lot of public speaking on behalf of the Air Force. As I said, I think being at first class put some pressure on some of the people above me that I didn't realize at the time. That's about the only way I really wasn't in long enough, like some of the other ladies were, for it to have an impact on my career.
Did becoming one of the first Air Force female pilots open other opportunities, either in your Air Force career or in your commercial airline career?
I'm sure it didn't hurt in my airline interview to mention that. And when my reserve duty was as an Air Force Academy and Air Force ROTC liaison officer, glorified recruiter, and it often impressed the young men and women that I was recruiting and talking to. And I, again, did some public speaking in that role as well.
How do you think your success impacted other women?
Well, I don't know if my personal success impacted that many other women, but this spring I went to the Women in Aviation Convention, and there were hundreds of women in flight suits at that convention. It was thrilling to see how many women were now flying airplanes, and how many squadron commanders and wing commanders we had that were female. So I'm pretty proud of the results.
Since you were involved in breaking the barrier for female Air Force pilots, did you break any other barriers during your career?
Well, I didn't know it at the time, but I learned later that I was one of the first women in Air Force ROTC. They had just opened it up when I started. I was in the 2-year program. I was second woman to take missile maintenance training and to be a combat targeting team chief in missiles. I went to Olympic Arena, which is the Missileers version of Red Flag, as a competitor, and tied for first place lost the coin toss and ended up in second place. So outside of flying, those were some of the things I did.
What message would you give to young women considering a career in the Air Force?
Go for it, girl. I got so much experience and had so many great friendships and things that carried me through my whole life, military and civilian wise. Dealing with people, dealing with situations. I really enjoyed my time in the military, missiles and flying. It's going to create a great foundation for the rest of your life.
Well, we've gone through all of the questions, but are there any other thoughts or ideas or stories you'd like to share?
Just that, if you do go in the Air Force or any other part of the military, enjoy it. Try to make the best of it. I think sometimes I was a little too serious. Didn't have as much fun as I could have had. I don't know where this would fit into your presentation, but something that has endeared me for quite a while. When I was in pilot training, I had one of the first Honda, what was it called? Anyway, it's a little bitty Honda. It wasn't much bigger than this desk. And I never knew where it was going to be in the morning when I went out there, because my classmates tended to, I think four or six of them could probably pick it up. So they would pick it up and they would move it. I'd find it on the sidewalk sometimes and in different places. And I just thought it was hilarious that, they even noticed me enough to bother to do that. So, things like that were fun. Squadron parties were always great fun. Squadron picnics. When I was a kid living on a military base, on the Air Force base, it was kind of like living in a country club. We had our pool and we had our commissary and we had our PX, we had our movie theater. You could walk around. I remember I used to walk around the base all the time, day or night, and not worry about it, because the security police were always cruising by in their pickup trucks. I felt very safe. We left the bicycles out on the front lawn all the time. Never thought about it. So the way of life on base was, like I said, it was like being in a country club, but not being rich.